The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble corridors of the royal palace, as Thomas walked his usual patrol route. He had served as a palace guard for 12 years, ever since he was 18 years old. His father before him had also been a guard, and Thomas took great pride in protecting the royal family. The polished armor he wore gleamed in the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, and his hand rested comfortably on the hilt of his sword. Thomas knew every corner of the palace, every secret passage, and every face that belonged within these walls. He had watched Prince George grow from a curious child into a thoughtful young man of 22. The prince was known throughout the kingdom for his kindness and fairness, qualities that made him beloved by both the servants and the common people who occasionally visited the palace. On this particular morning, everything seemed peaceful and routine. The kitchen staff was already busy preparing breakfast. The gardeners were tending to the royal gardens, and the other guards were taking their positions for the day shift. Thomas had no idea that his life was about to change forever. As he rounded the corner near the main throne room,
he noticed Lord Reginald, the king's most trusted advisor,
approaching with quick, determined steps. Lord Reginald was a tall, thin man with sharp features and cold gray eyes. He had served the king for over 20 years and wielded considerable power within the palace. Many of the servants feared him because of his harsh demeanor and quick temper. Thomas straightened his posture and offered a respectful bow as the advisor drew near. Lord Reginald stopped directly in front of him, his expression serious and somewhat troubled. The advisor glanced around nervously, as if making sure no one else was within earshot. "Guard Thomas," Lord Reginald said in a low voice, "I have an urgent matter that requires your immediate attention and absolute discretion." Thomas felt a knot forming in his stomach. In all his years of service, he had never been approached directly by the king's advisor for a special task. Usually, orders came through the captain of the guard or other senior officers. The fact that Lord Reginald was speaking to him personally seemed unusual and somehow ominous. "Yes, my lord," Thomas replied, keeping his voice steady despite his growing unease. "How may I serve?" Lord Reginald stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. "There is a serious threat to the kingdom that has come to my attention. Prince George has been meeting secretly with individuals who wish to undermine the king's authority. I have reliable information that he plans to challenge his father's rule and create division within the royal court." Thomas felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. The accusation seemed impossible to believe. Prince George had always shown nothing but love and respect for his father. The young prince often spoke proudly of the king's wisdom and leadership. How could he possibly be involved in any plot against the crown? "I find that difficult to believe, my lord," Thomas said carefully, trying to keep his voice respectful while expressing his doubt. "Prince George has always demonstrated loyalty to his father and to the kingdom." Lord Reginald's eyes flashed with irritation. "Your personal feelings about the prince are irrelevant, guard. I am telling you what my sources have discovered. The prince's apparent loyalty may be nothing more than a carefully constructed facade designed to hide his true intentions." The advisor paused for a moment, studying Thomas's face intently. "I am entrusting you with a mission of the utmost importance to the security of our realm. You are to arrest Prince George immediately and bring him to the tower for questioning. This must be done quietly and without causing a scene that might alert his co-conspirators." Thomas felt his world spinning out of control. The order went against everything he believed about his duty and his understanding of the royal family. How could he arrest the prince based solely on the word of the advisor, no matter how trusted he might be? The request seemed to violate the very oath he had taken to protect the royal family. "My lord," Thomas said slowly, "surely such a serious matter should be brought before the king himself. Perhaps His Majesty should be informed before any action is taken against his son." Lord Reginald's expression grew cold and threatening. "The king is currently indisposed and cannot be disturbed. He has given me full authority to handle matters of security in his absence." "Are you questioning my authority, guard?" The threat in the advisor's voice was unmistakable. Thomas knew that defying Lord Reginald could result in his immediate dismissal from the guard, or worse. His family depended on his position for their livelihood, and he had worked too hard to build his reputation to throw it all away. Yet something deep inside him rebelled against the idea of arresting Prince George without proper justification. As Thomas stood there, torn between his duty to follow orders and his instinct that something was terribly wrong, He heard familiar footsteps approaching. Prince George himself was walking down the corridor, heading directly toward them. The young prince moved with the confident stride of someone who belonged in the palace, someone who had never had to fear for his safety within these walls. Thomas felt panic rising in his chest. In just a few moments, he would have to make a choice that would define the rest of his life and possibly the fate of the kingdom itself. Prince George approached with a warm smile on his face, completely unaware of the tension that had filled the corridor just moments before. He was dressed in simple but elegant clothing, preferring comfort over the elaborate royal garments that court protocol usually demanded. His brown hair was slightly tousled from the morning breeze, and his green eyes sparkled with the enthusiasm of youth. "Good morning," Thomas, the prince said cheerfully, nodding to the guard he had known for most of his life. "I hope you're having a pleasant day." Thomas felt his throat tighten. This was the same young man he had watched grow up, the same prince who always remembered the names of the servants' children, and who had once helped Thomas carry supplies when the guard had injured his back. Now he was being ordered to arrest this kind-hearted person, based on accusations that seemed completely out of character. "Good morning, Your Highness," Thomas managed to reply, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. Lord Reginald stepped forward, his cold gaze fixed on the prince. "Your Highness, how convenient that you should appear just now. I was just discussing some security matters with Guard Thomas." Prince George looked between the advisor and the guard, sensing that something was amiss. His natural intelligence and years of court life had taught him to read the subtle signs of tension and conflict. The way Thomas avoided his eyes and the advisor's overly formal tone suggested that this was not a casual conversation. "Security matters?" Prince George asked, his voice carrying a note of curiosity mixed with concern. "Is there some threat to the palace that I should be aware of?" Lord Reginald's lips curved into what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Indeed, Your Highness. In fact, the threat is much closer than you might imagine." Thomas felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. He could see where this conversation was heading, and every fiber of his being rebelled against what he was being asked to do. The prince stood there innocently, trusting in the safety and security of his own home, completely unaware that he was about to be accused of treason. "I don't understand," Prince George said, his brow furrowing with confusion. "What kind of threat could be close to the palace? Our security has always been excellent, thanks to dedicated guards like Thomas here." The praise from the prince only made Thomas feel worse. He looked at Lord Reginald, silently pleading for the advisor to reconsider, to find another way to handle whatever concerns he might have. But the advisor's expression remained unchanged, cold and determined. "Guard Thomas," Lord Reginald said sharply, "I believe I gave you a direct order. Are you going to follow it? Or must I find someone more reliable to carry out this essential duty?" Prince George's eyes widened as he began to understand that something serious was happening. "What order?" he asked, looking directly at Thomas. "What is Lord Reginald asking you to do?" Thomas felt as if his heart might stop beating altogether. The moment of truth had arrived, and he could no longer avoid making the choice that would determine not only his own fate, but potentially the future of the kingdom. He looked into Prince George's trusting eyes and felt his resolve crumbling. "My lord," Thomas said, turning back to the advisor, "I cannot arrest Prince George without clear evidence of wrongdoing. Such an action goes against everything I have sworn to uphold as a member of the Royal Guard." Lord Reginald's face flushed with anger. "You dare to defy a direct order from the king's advisor? This is insubordination of the highest degree." Prince George stepped forward, his own anger beginning to show. "Arrest me? On what charges? What possible reason could there be for such an action?" "You are accused of plotting against your father and seeking to undermine his rule," Lord Reginald declared, his voice echoing through the corridor. "I have evidence of your treasonous meetings and your plans to divide the kingdom." The accusation hung in the air like a physical blow. Prince George staggered backward as if he had been struck, his face pale with shock and disbelief. Thomas felt sick to his stomach watching the young man he had helped raise absorb this devastating charge. "That's impossible," Prince George whispered, his voice barely audible. "I would never. I love my father. I would die before I would betray him or the kingdom." Lord Reginald showed no mercy. "Your protestations of innocence mean nothing. The evidence speaks for itself. Guard Thomas, you have one final opportunity to follow orders and arrest this traitor, or you will be charged with aiding and abetting treason." Thomas looked at the prince's shocked face and made his decision. I will not arrest Prince George based solely on accusations without proof. If you have evidence, present it to the king and let him decide how to proceed. The corridor fell silent except for the sound of their breathing. Lord Reginald's face had turned purple with rage, while Prince George seemed to be struggling to process what was happening to him. Thomas stood between them, knowing that he had just made a choice that would change everything, but feeling certain that it was the right choice. Very well, Lord Reginald said through clenched teeth. You have made your position clear, guard. But this matter is far from over. There are other guards in this palace who understand the meaning of duty and obedience. As the advisor turned to leave, presumably to find someone else to carry out his orders, Thomas realized that he had only bought Prince George a small amount of time. The danger was far from over, and now both of them were in serious trouble. As Lord Reginald's footsteps echoed down the hallway, Prince George turned to Thomas with a mixture of gratitude and determination in his eyes. The shock of the accusation was beginning to wear off, replaced by a growing anger at the injustice of the situation and concern for the loyal guard who had risked everything to protect him. Thomas, the prince said quietly, you didn't have to do that. You've put your career and possibly your life in danger for me. Thomas straightened his shoulders and looked the prince directly in the eye. Your Highness, I took an oath to protect the royal family and to serve with honor. I cannot fulfill that oath by arresting an innocent man based on unproven accusations. Prince George felt a surge of emotion at the guard's loyalty. In a world where political intrigue and self-interest often ruled, Thomas's unwavering integrity stood out like a beacon. The prince realized that he now had a responsibility to protect this good man who had sacrificed so much for him. We need to reach my father immediately, Prince George said, his mind racing through possibilities. If Lord Reginald is acting without the king's knowledge, then my father needs to know what's happening. If he is acting on the king's orders. The prince paused, unable to finish the thought that his own father might believe him capable of treason. Thomas nodded gravely. The king is in his private chambers this morning, reviewing correspondence from the northern provinces, but Lord Reginald will likely try to intercept us before we can reach him. Then we'll have to be clever about this, Prince George replied, his natural intelligence beginning to assert itself. Lord Reginald knows the palace almost as well as we do, but he doesn't know all the secret passages that you and I discovered when I was younger. Thomas almost smiled, despite the gravity of their situation. He remembered those days when a curious young prince had convinced him to explore every hidden corner of the palace. What had seemed like harmless adventures at the time might now save both their lives. The passage behind the tapestry in the east wing, Thomas suggested. It leads directly to the corridor outside the king's chambers. Prince George was about to agree when they heard the sound of multiple sets of boots approaching rapidly. Lord Reginald had wasted no time in gathering other guards to carry out his orders. The prince grabbed Thomas's arm and pulled him toward a nearby alcove, just as 3 guards rounded the corner, led by Captain Marcus, the head of the palace guard. Captain Marcus was a stern man in his 50s who had served the royal family faithfully for decades. Unlike Thomas, he was known for following orders without question, regardless of his personal feelings. The prince felt his heart sink as he realized that Lord Reginald had chosen his enforcers well. Search every room, Captain Marcus commanded his men. The advisor wants Prince George brought to the tower immediately. He is to be treated as a prisoner, not as royalty. The words hit Prince George like physical blows. To be treated as a prisoner in his own home by men he had known since childhood seemed like a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. Thomas placed a protective hand on the prince's shoulder, ready to fight if necessary. As the guards began their search, Prince George made a quick decision. Instead of hiding and waiting to be caught, he stepped out of the alcove and confronted the men directly. Captain Marcus, he called out, his voice carrying the authority of his royal birth. I'm right here. There's no need for a search. The captain stopped in his tracks, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Unlike Lord Reginald, Captain Marcus had genuine respect and affection for the prince, making this assignment particularly difficult for him. Your Highness, Captain Marcus said slowly, I have orders to escort you to the tower for questioning. I'm sorry, but I must ask you to come with us. Prince George stood tall, every inch the future king he was born to be. On whose authority, Captain? Have you spoken directly with my father about this matter? Captain Marcus hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Prince George saw his opportunity. "I demand to speak with the king before any action is taken. As his son and heir to the throne, I have that right under the ancient laws of our kingdom." The captain looked torn between his duty to follow orders and his knowledge that the prince was correct about his legal rights. The other guards waited for his decision, equally uncomfortable with the situation they found themselves in. Lord Reginald said that the king was not to be disturbed, Captain Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Since when does an advisor decide when the king can or cannot be disturbed by his own son?" Prince George challenged. "Captain, you've known me my entire life. Do you truly believe I am capable of treason against my father and our kingdom?" Captain Marcus looked into the prince's eyes and saw the same honest, caring young man he had watched grow up. The doubt that had been growing in his mind since receiving his orders began to crystallize into certainty that something was very wrong with this entire situation. "Your Highness," Captain Marcus said carefully, "perhaps we should all go together to speak with the king. He should be informed of these serious accusations and given the opportunity to address them personally." Lord Reginald's voice cut through the air like a blade as he appeared at the end of the corridor, having returned with additional guards. "Captain Marcus, you will follow your orders immediately, or you will find yourself joining the prince in the tower." The confrontation that Prince George had been dreading was about to reach its climax, and he realized that the next few minutes would determine not only his own fate, but the future of everyone who had chosen to stand with him. Lord Reginald strode down the corridor with 6 additional guards behind him, his face a mask of cold fury. The advisor had clearly expected his orders to be carried out swiftly and without question. Finding the prince still free and apparently winning over Captain Marcus had only increased his determination to see this matter resolved his way. "I will not tolerate any more delays or insubordination," Lord Reginald declared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Prince George will be arrested immediately, and anyone who interferes will be charged with treason as well." Prince George felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could see the fear in the eyes of some of the guards, men who were caught between their loyalty to the royal family and their fear of the powerful advisor. Thomas stood firmly beside him, hand resting on his sword hilt, ready to defend the prince with his life if necessary. Captain Marcus found himself in an impossible position. His years of military training demanded obedience to authority, but his conscience rebelled against arresting a prince he believed to be innocent. The tension in the corridor was so thick it seemed almost solid, and everyone present knew that the next few moments would determine the course of events. "Lord Reginald," Prince George said, stepping forward with the dignity befitting his royal status, "I challenge the authority by which you act. Show me the written orders from my father commanding my arrest. Show me the evidence of this alleged treason you claim I have committed." The advisor's eyes flashed with anger at being challenged so directly. "Your demands are irrelevant. I act with the full authority of the crown, and that is all the justification required. That's not how our laws work, and you know it," Prince George replied firmly. "Even the king must follow proper procedures when serious accusations are made. I am not just any citizen. I am the heir to the throne, and I have rights that cannot be simply dismissed." Thomas watched the exchange with growing admiration for the young prince's courage and intelligence. Despite facing what appeared to be overwhelming odds, Prince George was not cowering or begging for mercy. Instead, he was standing up for the principles of justice and law that formed the foundation of their kingdom. Some of the guards who had accompanied Lord Reginald began to shift uncomfortably. They had expected to find a guilty prince trying to flee or hide, not a dignified young man demanding due process and proper evidence. Seeds of doubt about their mission began to take root in their minds. Lord Reginald sensed the changing mood and decided to press his advantage more aggressively. "Your eloquent words cannot hide your guilt, Prince George. I have witnesses who saw you meeting with known enemies of the crown. I have documents that prove your involvement in plots against the king." "Then produce these witnesses and documents," Prince George challenged. "Let them be examined in the proper manner before my father and the royal court, where their authenticity can be verified." The advisor's jaw clenched tightly. The truth was that his evidence was largely fabricated or taken out of context, designed to remove Prince George from the line of succession for reasons that had nothing to do with protecting the kingdom. He had hoped to avoid scrutiny by acting quickly and decisively, but the prince's insistence on proper procedures was threatening to expose the weakness of his case. "Enough of this delay," Lord Reginald snapped. "Captain Marcus, arrest the prince immediately, or I will have you relieved of command and charged with dereliction of duty." Captain Marcus looked at the prince, then at Thomas, and finally at the other guards who were waiting for his decision. In that moment, he remembered why he had joined the royal guard in the first place. Not to serve the ambitions of powerful courtiers, but to protect the royal family and uphold justice. "My lord," Captain Marcus said slowly, "I believe Prince George's request to see his father is reasonable under the circumstances. Perhaps we should escort His Highness to the King's chambers, so this matter can be resolved properly." Lord Reginald's face turned red with rage. "You are all in defiance of direct orders. This is mutiny. This is justice," a new voice said from behind the advisor. Everyone turned to see King William himself approaching, drawn by the sounds of conflict in his palace. The king was a man in his early 50s with graying hair and the bearing of someone who had ruled wisely for many years. His presence immediately changed the dynamic of the confrontation, as all present bowed respectfully to their sovereign. Prince George felt a mixture of relief and anxiety at his father's appearance. Relief that he would finally have the chance to defend himself against the accusations, but anxiety about whether his father would believe the charges against him. "What is the meaning of this disturbance in my palace?" King William asked, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power. "Lord Reginald, explain why my son appears to be surrounded by guards as if he were a common criminal." Lord Reginald quickly composed himself and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, I was acting to protect your throne and your kingdom. Prince George has been involved in treasonous activities, and I felt immediate action was necessary to prevent further damage." The king's eyes moved from the advisor to his son, searching for the truth in their faces. "George, what do you say to these accusations?" Prince George met his father's gaze directly, knowing that this moment would define their relationship forever. "Father, I swear by my love for you and for our kingdom that I have never committed any act of treason. I have never plotted against you or sought to undermine your rule. I ask only for the chance to face my accusers and examine the evidence against me in a fair proceeding." King William studied his son's face carefully. He had raised this young man from birth and had always found him to be honest and honorable. The idea that George would betray him seemed inconsistent with everything the king knew about his son's character. King William's penetrating gaze moved slowly from his son to Lord Reginald, and the advisor suddenly found himself feeling less confident than he had moments before. The king had not reached his position of power by being easily fooled or manipulated, and his years of experience had taught him to read people's true intentions beneath their words. "Lord Reginald," the king said in a measured tone, "these are extremely serious accusations you have brought against my son and heir. I trust you have substantial evidence to support such grave charges." Lord Reginald straightened his shoulders, trying to project confidence he no longer fully felt. "Indeed, Your Majesty. I have gathered considerable proof of Prince George's treasonous activities over the past several weeks." "Excellent," King William replied. "Then you will have no difficulty presenting this evidence to me immediately. Captain Marcus, please escort everyone to the throne room where we can examine these materials properly." Prince George felt a surge of hope at his father's decision to handle the matter formally and publicly. A fair examination of the evidence would quickly reveal the weakness of the accusations against him. Thomas also felt relieved that the king was insisting on proper procedures, rather than allowing the advisor to act on his word alone. Lord Reginald, however, felt his carefully constructed plan beginning to crumble. He had counted on being able to act quickly and quietly, removing Prince George from the picture before anyone could ask too many questions. A formal hearing would expose the fabricated nature of much of his evidence. As they walked toward the throne room, the king fell into step beside his son. "George," he said quietly, "I need you to tell me honestly. Have you been meeting with anyone who might be considered an enemy of the crown?" Prince George thought carefully before answering. "Father, I have been meeting with representatives from various groups throughout the kingdom. Merchants concerned about trade policies, farmers worried about taxation, scholars discussing educational reforms. I believe it's important for the future king to understand the concerns of all your subjects." King William nodded thoughtfully. His son's activities sounded exactly like what he would expect from a responsible heir to the throne. Did Lord Reginald know about these meetings? I mentioned some of them to him, Prince George replied. I thought he might have valuable insights to share, given his years of experience in government. A look of understanding began to dawn in the king's eyes. He was starting to see how his advisor might have twisted innocent meetings into something sinister. The realization that someone he had trusted for so many years might be capable of such deception filled him with both anger and sadness. When they reached the throne room, King William took his place on the royal throne while Prince George stood before him, flanked by Thomas and Captain Marcus. Lord Reginald positioned himself off to one side, surrounded by the guards he had brought with him. The formal setting emphasized the gravity of the proceedings. Lord Reginald, the king commanded, present your evidence against Prince George. The advisor produced a folder containing several documents and began reading from what he claimed were reports from his agents. Your Majesty, my sources inform me that Prince George has been meeting secretly with Lord Pemberton, who, as you know, has been critical of certain royal policies. Lord Pemberton is a respected member of the nobility who has every right to express his opinions, Prince George interjected. Our meeting was hardly secret. It took place in the palace gardens in broad daylight, and I informed several people of my intention to speak with him. King William raised an eyebrow. Lord Reginald, do you have any evidence that this meeting involved treasonous discussion rather than legitimate political discourse? The advisor shuffled through his papers nervously. Well, Your Majesty, the suspicious nature of the meeting itself suggests— Suggests what? The king interrupted. That my son was performing his duty as heir to the throne by listening to the concerns of our subjects? You'll need more substantial evidence than suspicious meetings to support charges of treason. Lord Reginald felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead as he realized how weak his case sounded when subjected to scrutiny. There are also these documents, he said, producing several papers with what appeared to be Prince George's handwriting. Prince George stepped forward to examine the documents and immediately recognized what had been done. Father, these are notes I made during my meetings with various groups, recording their concerns and suggestions. But someone has altered them, adding words and phrases that change their meaning entirely. King William gestured for the documents to be brought to him. As he examined them carefully, his expression grew increasingly dark. His years of experience with official documents made it relatively easy for him to spot the alterations that had been made to his son's innocent notes. Lord Reginald, the king, said in a voice that had grown noticeably colder, "These documents have clearly been tampered with. Do you take me for a fool who cannot recognize forgery when I see it?" The advisor realized that his plan was completely falling apart. In desperation, he made one final attempt to salvage the situation. Your Majesty, even if some of the evidence may appear questionable, the overall pattern of Prince George's behavior clearly indicates that my son has been doing exactly what I would expect of a future king, King William said, rising from his throne with barely controlled anger. He has been meeting with our subjects, listening to their concerns and taking notes on matters that require attention. The only questionable behavior I see here is your own. Thomas felt a tremendous sense of relief as he watched the truth finally come to light. His faith in Prince George had been vindicated, and his decision to refuse the advisor's orders now appeared wise rather than foolish. Captain Marcus and the other guards also looked relieved that they would not have to arrest an innocent prince. But Lord Reginald was not yet ready to admit defeat. With his political career and possibly his life hanging in the balance, he decided to make one desperate gamble that would either save him or destroy him completely. Lord Reginald's face had gone pale as he realized the gravity of his situation, but desperation drove him to make one final, reckless move. Drawing himself up to his full height, he pointed an accusing finger at Prince George and declared loudly, "Your Majesty, you are being deceived by your son's clever words. He has bewitched you just as he has bewitched others with his false charm." The throne room fell silent at this outrageous accusation. King William's eyes blazed with fury at the advisor's implication that he, the king, was too weak-minded to see through deception. Even the guards who had accompanied Lord Reginald looked shocked at their leader's desperate words. "How dare you?" King William said, his voice low and dangerous. "How dare you suggest that I am incapable of recognizing truth from lies, or that my own son would manipulate me?" Prince George stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on his father's arm. Despite everything Lord Reginald had put him through, the prince felt a mixture of anger and pity for the man who had once been trusted with such important responsibilities. "Father," Prince George said calmly, "I think Lord Reginald's actions speak louder than his words. The question we must ask is why he would go to such lengths to fabricate evidence against me." This observation struck at the heart of the matter, and King William's strategic mind immediately began working through the possibilities. What could motivate his trusted advisor to attempt such an elaborate deception? The answer, when it came to him, filled him with both understanding and disappointment. "Lord Reginald," the king said slowly, "I believe it's time for complete honesty. What did you hope to gain by removing my son from the line of succession?" The advisor's shoulders sagged as he realized that his last desperate gamble had failed completely. The truth was that he had been approached by foreign agents who promised him great wealth and position if he could create chaos within the royal family. They had convinced him that Prince George's progressive ideas about listening to common people would weaken the kingdom and make it vulnerable to invasion. "I thought I was protecting the kingdom," Lord Reginald said quietly, his voice barely audible. "I believed that Prince George's methods would make us appear weak to our enemies. So you decided to commit treason to prevent what you saw as potential weakness?" King William asked incredulously. "You fabricated evidence, attempted to arrest my innocent son, and tried to manipulate me into destroying my own family?" The full weight of his actions finally seemed to hit Lord Reginald, and he collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I see now that I was terribly, horribly wrong." Thomas watched this dramatic conclusion with a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that justice was finally being served, but sadness at seeing how pride and fear had corrupted a man who had once served the kingdom faithfully. King William turned to address the guards who had been present throughout this ordeal. "Let this be a lesson to all of us about the importance of questioning orders that seem wrong, even when they come from those in authority." Thomas and Captain Marcus showed wisdom and courage in refusing to act without proper justification. Prince George approached Thomas and clasped the guard's shoulder warmly. "Thomas, you risked everything to stand up for what was right. Your loyalty and integrity saved not just my life but possibly the stability of our entire kingdom." Thomas felt overwhelmed by the prince's words and the king's praise. "Your Highness, I simply did what my conscience demanded. I could not arrest someone I knew to be innocent, regardless of the consequences." King William smiled at this exchange, proud of both his son's character and the loyalty he inspired in good people like Thomas. "Thomas, your actions today demonstrate the highest ideals of service to the crown. I am promoting you to the position of personal guard to Prince George, with all the honors and responsibilities that position entails." The promotion was both an honor and a practical decision, as the king realized that his son would need trustworthy people around him as he prepared to eventually take the throne. Thomas accepted the position with gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. As for Lord Reginald, his fate was decided with a mixture of justice and mercy that reflected the wisdom King William had gained through years of rule. The former advisor would be stripped of his position and properties, but rather than execution, he would be exiled to a distant monastery where he could spend his remaining years contemplating his mistakes and perhaps finding redemption. In the days that followed, Prince George implemented new procedures for handling accusations against members of the royal family, ensuring that such a situation could never arise again. He also continued his meetings with various groups throughout the kingdom, but now with his father's full knowledge and support. Thomas settled into his new role with dedication and pride, knowing that he had proven himself worthy of the trust placed in him. The friendship between the prince and his guard, tested by crisis, emerged stronger than ever. The kingdom learned valuable lessons about the importance of integrity, the dangers of blind obedience to authority, and the courage required to stand up for truth, even when it comes at great personal cost. Most importantly, the royal family demonstrated that even those in the highest positions of power must be subject to the law and accountable for their actions. Years later, when Prince George became King George, he would often tell the story of the day his guard refused an unjust order, reminding his court that true loyalty sometimes requires the courage to say no to those in power when they are wrong. Thomas remained by his side throughout his reign, a constant reminder that honor and integrity are worth more than gold or position.